Hey everyone, tonight we're kicking off with something a little eerie. You're lying there, tucked beneath your blanket, maybe half watching videos while your brain drifts, and somewhere deep inside that comfortable modern skull of yours, a spark stirs. Something ancient, something that once belonged on a battlefield. You may think of yourself as calm and civilized, but the species you come from? It's got a mean streak. Picture this, a newborn, wide-eyed and blinking, its tiny fingers curling like soft question marks. Now cut hard to a roaring mushroom cloud, heat, shockwave, devastation. That's us. Somewhere between lullabies and launch codes, something went sideways. Or maybe, chillingly, it went exactly right. Is violence coded into our genes? Or did we craft it, refine it, turn it into something both majestic and monstrous? Because when you zoom far enough out, history doesn't resemble progress. It looks like a loop. Build, destroy, rebuild, repeat. And you, cozy where you are the descendant of those who did the destroying. So before you settle in, take a second to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all watching from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe let a fan hum softly in the background. Let's drift into tonight's story. You entered life surrounded by warmth and silence. But out there, in the long, bloody chronicle of humankind, quiet was rare. Violence isn't just in the news. It's in your stance, your heartbeat, your reflex when you're startled. It's in the curve of your fingernails, in that flash of adrenaline when someone shouts nearby. It's older than speech, older than history, and maybe most unsettling of all, it's natural. You don't begin violent. You begin soft, blinking, helpless, but in mere weeks you'll grab, wail, and even hit, not out of malice but instinct. It's communication through chaos. Feed me, hold me, protect me. The circuitry is ancient. Even babies get territorial, upset when another infant enters their bubble, both cute and faintly ominous. Some evolutionary psychologists argue that aggression is as deeply rooted as affection itself. Your brain walks a tightrope between empathy and fear, between kindness and survival. For millennia, those who lashed out first often lived longer, which means your gentle, thinking brain. It's a veteran of countless invisible wars. Consider this. The same neural wiring that solves puzzles also plans ambushes. The cognitive toolkit for building cities is the same one that engineers destruction. We didn't evolve despite violence. We might have evolved through it. And yet, here's the contradiction. Even with that savage inheritance, you crave peace. You tell stories, nurture children, cry at films, write songs. How can one species invent both the violin and the bomb? Historians still argue whether ancient humans were more violent than we are, or if we've simply gotten better at disguising it. Some celebrate falling homicide rates. Others point out that mass violence has only grown more efficient. Is a duel more brutal than a drone strike? Hard to measure, but the pattern is clear. You've inherited it all. The tenderness and the rage, the creation and the ruin. It flickers in you constantly, even in small ways. That spark when someone cuts ahead of you, the jolt at a slamming door, the thrill of winning an argument. Tiny echoes of ancient battles played out in modern moments. Even your favorite stories, the shows, the games, are drenched in struggle and glorious conflict. There's something deeply human in that clash, that risk, that victory. It doesn't make you cruel. It just makes you one of us. Still, the question lingers in your mind. Are we evolving beyond violence, or just catching our breath between rounds? Let's pull the camera all the way back, before cities, before metal, before kings, queens, Wi-Fi or toothpaste. There were only people, barefoot, hungry, sun-baked. They hunted, scavenged, slept beneath the open sky, and when they crossed paths with strangers, they didn't always exchange recipes. Sometimes they fought, over food, over water, over fear. That's where we're heading next. Because the clues, bones, fractured skulls, scattered tools, tell a story bedtime books never mention. But relax. Tonight you're not that kind of human. You've got a pillow, a roof, and the rare comfort of listening to history instead of making it. You're standing now on a dry, endless plain. No roads, no houses, just wind, dust, and remnants of life. You kneel, brush away some earth, and there it is. A fragment of skull, split clean through, not by beast, not by chance, but by intent. Someone once aimed for that break. This isn't a scene from some dystopian future. It's our past, and it's far more savage than we like to think. The first tools weren't for crafting or cooking. They were for killing. The oldest stone implements ever found, over 2.5 million years old, weren't refined or elegant. They were rough, jagged, built to crush and tear. Mostly they butchered animals, but sometimes the bones they shattered walked on two legs. You might imagine early humans as scruffy bands of sharers, swapping food and laughter by the fire. Sometimes yes, but those same fires threw long, dark shadows. And in those shadows, someone was sharpening a stone. The fossil record doesn't lie, it's written in blood. Look at Nataruk, in what's now Kenya. Around 10,000 years ago, a band of foragers, men, women, even children, was ambushed by another. Their skeletons tell the story. Cracked skulls, broken ribs, obsidian blades still lodged in bone. Some were bound, none were buried. It wasn't a fight. It was a massacre. And it wasn't the only one. Across countless ancient sites, archaeologists find the same marks. Defensive fractures, crushed craniums, embedded projectiles. This was no accident. These were deliberate acts of harm. Historians still debate, was this constant warfare or rare explosions of rage in quieter times? Some think early humans mostly lived in peace, fighting only when pushed. Others argue conflict was as inevitable as hunger. Either way, one truth stands firm. Violence didn't begin with civilization. It began long before pottery, before writing, before words, maybe even before us. There's a chilling thought that violence actually helped shape what we became. Picture this. Two small groups meet by a river. One stronger, faster, more organized. The other slower, unprepared, hesitant. Who survives? Who leaves descendants? Who learns to strike first? That's natural selection's dark side. The survivors weren't always the kindest. They were the quickest to act. Here's the twist. Those crude tools of survival weren't only weapons. They were brain builders. Not directly, but the skill to make and use them demanded planning, memory, coordination. In trying to harm, we learned to think. So in a strange way, violence wasn't just destruction, it was innovation. Even hunting pushed it further. Imagine driving herds of ancient bison over cliffs, hundreds at once. Bones snap, bodies pile high. It wasn't personal, but it was carnage. And yes, there's cannibalism. Some of the earliest human remains show the unmistakable signs. Cut marks, missing marrow, skulls split for brains. Whether ritual, survival, or hunger, it's all the same end. Violence pushed to its absolute edge, and yet something else began to grow alongside it. Compassion. Some skeletons show healed fractures, mended skulls, proof that someone cared enough to help, feed, wait. The same hands that struck also soothed. The killers were caretakers too. The blood and the kindness evolved together. Walk farther through the ruins and you'll see it. The unexpected. Red ochre. A splash of color. Maybe paint. Maybe ritual. Maybe art. Imagine that. Hands still stained with blood, reaching for beauty. Violence and creativity. Twins born in the same cradle. So what does it all mean for you? It means your ancestors weren't just savage. They were ingenious, emotional, capable of cruelty and tenderness in the same breath, and you carry both inside you. You might want to believe you've outgrown that world, that you're civilized now, but not so fast. Those chipped stones became blades, then swords, then guns, then bombs. And each time the question wasn't can we make them, it was should we? The answer almost always was yes. So the next time you notice a smooth stone at your feet, remember, it's not just a rock. It's the ancestor of every weapon ever made. The first quiet whisper of all the violence to come. You're walking now, barefoot, sun on your skin, the horizon stretching wide and merciless. No borders, no fences, no signs. But you know instinctively where your land ends and theirs begins. That ridge, that watering hole, those fruit trees, they're yours. And those figures on the far hill, they don't belong here. Long before there were flags or maps, humans understood territory. You didn't need ink or borders. You only needed hunger, fear, and the faint scent of a stranger carried on the wind. Small bands of early humans, bound by blood, drifted through the world like restless shadows, each one certain of only one thing: survive. But they weren't alone out there. Other bands traced the same paths, stalked the same game, sought out the same caves. And sometimes their worlds collided, sometimes they traded, sometimes they clashed. Prehistoric conflict wasn't organized the way modern warfare is. No commanders, no banners, just sharp sticks, frantic eyes, and one brutal question: them or us? And here's the strange twist. Your ancestors weren't always the aggressors. Sometimes they were just unlucky. A misunderstood glance, a stolen carcass, a crying child near the wrong shelter, and suddenly the air turned deadly. One moment you're resting. The next you're running, fighting, bleeding. Archaeologists have unearthed skeletons, tens of thousands of years old, marked with healed fractures, shattered ribs, caved-in skulls. These weren't isolated mishaps. They were records of repeated survival. Scholars still argue over what this violence meant. Was it ambushes and raids, grudges escalating into cycles of revenge, or the earliest rehearsals of organized assault? Evidence hints at seasonal conflict, bands returning to the same hunting grounds year after year, colliding again and again. Some suspect vengeance was the spark. Theft, retaliation, escalation. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Different millennia, same story. Only the weapons changed. Survival made violence rational. Food was rare. Water, rarer still. You couldn't tap a screen and order dinner. Every bite demanded struggle. So when strangers stepped into your land, they weren't just visitors. They were competition. A threat to everything that kept you alive. Fighting wasn't always anger. It was arithmetic. And here comes the darker truth. Sometimes violence worked. Raiding another group meant more food, more mates, more hands to work and fight. The math of survival favored the ruthless. It's horrifying, but evolution doesn't deal in morals, it deals in results. Even language might owe something to bloodshed. To hunt, to warn, to ambush, you needed to plan, to whisper, to coordinate. Words became tools sharper than flint. Anthropologists even suggest that the rhythm and pitch of human speech evolved to carry better across open savannas. The very cadence of your voice, its rise, its fall, was molded by survival, by strategy, by whispered plans beneath the stars. And then there was intimidation, the first stage of battle before the first blow. The display, painted faces, guttural shouts, the drumming of chests, the brandishing of weapons. Sometimes that theatre worked. The scarier group walked away with blood unspilled. Maybe that's why symbolic behavior, paint, masks, posture, emerged in the first place. Bluffing saved lives, and the best bluffers passed on their genes. Still, even with all this noise and showmanship, fighting was constant. And the victims weren't always fighters. Children, elders, the sleeping, many never saw it coming. Violence back then wasn't noble or clean. It was chaotic, desperate, and horribly effective. Take Jebel Sahaba in modern-day Sudan, 13,000 years ago. Dozens of bodies buried together, arrowheads still wedged in bone, some skeletons scarred by multiple wounds, some showing signs of old injuries healed before death found them again. Violence wasn't rare, it was routine. We like to imagine those clashes as isolated tragedies, but the bones tell a different story, a pattern of conflict woven into life itself. And yet, even amid brutality, there was tenderness. Many of those same skeletons were laid carefully, covered with ochre, adorned with beads. Someone grieved. Someone remembered. The killers and the mourners were often the same species, sometimes the same hands. They weren't monsters. They were human. They laughed, they sang, they held one another close, and they killed. The line between then and now isn't a clean break. It's a long, fading blur. The instincts that once drove you to guard your campfire still live behind your polite smiles, just rebranded, better dressed, and logged in online. You still protect, you still defend, you still flare at strangers. The wiring is ancient, the software just got an upgrade, and as you lie there tonight, cocooned in safety, that old circuitry hums quietly beneath your calm. It whispers in your dreams, pulses in your reflexes, quickens your heart when footsteps close in behind you. This isn't distant history, it's inheritance. The ground beneath you shifts, grass thickens, wilder, the air buzzes. From the trees a shriek, then faces, familiar yet foreign. Heavy brows, long arms, narrow chins, eyes that hold something cold and unreadable. You've wandered beyond Homo sapiens territory now, into the lands of your cousins. Welcome to the primates. You might believe violence began with us, that it's civilization's side effect. But long before the first humans fought, our relatives were already at it. Take chimpanzees, adorable, intelligent, and terrifying when roused. Bands of males creep into rival lands, launch ambushes, tear their opponents apart with chilling precision. They strike throats, faces, groins, then vanish into silence. Not random rage. Strategy. Territory gained, rivals lost. The math, again, is survival. Gorillas, too, clash when dominance or mates are at stake. Massive, chest-beating thunder. Contests of sheer strength. Sometimes infants die in the chaos, a brutal reset. Nature's restart button. But there's a counterpoint. The bonobo. Equally close to us, yet their wars are replaced with touch, play, and affection. They disarm tension with intimacy, love, not blood. Scientists still debate why these cousins chose such different paths, diet, environment, social bonds, but one truth stands out. Even among apes, violence isn't destiny. It's a decision. Now step deeper into the cave. Bones crunch softly underfoot. Firelight flickers over shapes that are almost human. Neanderthals. Shorter, stronger, built for ice and hardship. For ages we painted them as dull brutes. But that story cracked too. They made tools, jewelry, art. And yes, they fought. Some skulls bear impact wounds, clubs, stones, deliberate blows. Some bones show cuts and scrapes like butchered meat. Was it ritual, starvation, or something darker? No one knows for sure. But the boundary between survival and savagery was razor thin. Then came us, Homo sapiens. When we met the Neanderthals, there were moments of peace, even love. Interbreeding left traces in our DNA. But there were likely battles too. Fear, competition, extermination. Two intelligent species, both armed and wary. One vanished. One remained. We call it victory. But maybe it was just survival's grim arithmetic. And in some of those same caves, beside butchered bones, archaeologists find flutes made of bone. Music and murder side by side. That's humanity distilled. Beauty and brutality, tangled forever. So what does that mean for you tonight, wrapped in warmth? It means violence isn't an invention. It's an inheritance, older than fire. It's coded in the folds of your brain, deep in the amygdala, forged when fear meant life or death. But inside that same brain lives empathy, recognition, kindness. Both forces share the same circuitry, forever balancing the blade and the balm. That's the true story of violence. It's not about monsters. It's about mirrors. Your ancestors fought, healed, comforted, and destroyed, often in the same breath. And so do you. Don't worry. You won't wake up tomorrow and charge into a chimp warband. But remember, the next time anger flares, when someone cuts you off, or an online post ignites your fury, that feeling isn't new. It's ancient, practiced, worn smooth by time, but so is mercy, so is restraint. You've inherited the claws and the compassion. The question is, which one will you use? The grass parts again. You hear movement, grunts, the creak of leather, the spark of flint. Ahead, figures move in firelight, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, wrapped in furs. You duck behind a rock and realize they're not Neanderthals. They're you, early Homo sapiens. Not the kind who sip coffee and scroll feeds, but the kind who see another human and must decide, friend or threat. Because once we took the stage, violence didn't end. It evolved. Gone were the scattered skirmishes in caves. What came next was something far larger and far deadlier. Now, the fighting had purpose. It was calculated, deliberate. Strategy had entered the picture. This was the birth of what we can truly call war. For generations, hunter-gatherer bands had managed a fragile balance, nimble, temporary, and difficult to track. But when people began to settle, the equation changed. Farming took root. Grain filled storage pits. Land gained value. And suddenly, there was something to own and something to lose. Conflict shifted. It wasn't just survival anymore. It became about power, wealth, and pride. Whoever ruled the land ruled the harvest. Whoever ruled the harvest ruled life itself. Archaeological sites from the Neolithic and early Bronze Age reveal the grim aftermath. Mass graves filled with men, women, and children. Their skulls shattered, their ribs split by blades. At Talheim, in Germany, 34 bodies lay together, many struck from behind. No sign of defense. That wasn't a battle. It was an execution. And Talheim wasn't the only one. Schletz in Austria, Herxheim in Germany. Each site tells the same story. Violence done not in chaos, but in sequence, planned, intentional, efficient. Why? Historians still wrestle with that. Were these massacres driven by revenge, resources, ritual? Maybe all three. What's certain is this: killing became communication. Death was used to send a message. And here's the irony. Around the same time that humanity learned to slaughter systematically, it also began to build systematically. Walls, roads, canals. Agriculture brought abundance. Abundance brought inequality. Inequality birthed ambition. And ambition always needs an enemy. Civilization didn't tame the human animal, it armed it. Early city-states employed full-time warriors. These weren't hunters who fought on weekends. They were specialists, trained, fed, and kept alive for one purpose: to kill. That's an evolutionary milestone. With cities came writing. Humanity began documenting everything: grain ledgers, trade deals, and of course wars. The earliest Sumerian cuneiform tablets boast of conquered lands, captured prisoners, and divine approval. Kings didn't just fight, they performed victory for the gods. Lose a war? Clearly you had offended them. War became theatre, religion, its script. Killing wasn't random, it was ritualized. Battles began with ceremonies. Mercy, when it appeared, was regulated by custom. Even vengeance had its boundaries. Early legal codes tried to restrain the cycle. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Primitive, yes, but it marked the dawn of justice, a blood-stained attempt at balance. But laws didn't end violence, they structured it. Instead of stopping the killing, they organized it, transforming impulse into policy. And the tools, those evolved too. Stone gave way to bronze, spears became sharper, bows stronger. The invention of metallurgy changed everything. Facing an opponent armed with a bronze sword when you still held a rock-tipped spear wasn't just terrifying, it was hopeless. War gleamed now, polished and deadly. Violence fueled innovation. Better weapons brought more victories brought more resources. More resources meant more time to invent even better weapons. The wheel of progress spun on blood. So here you stand, human, maker, thinker, singer, and now warrior. You didn't plan this evolution, but it came for you anyway, fight by fight, century by century. Picture this: snow crunches underfoot. The world is silent, white and sharp with cold. Near a frozen stream lies a man curled in the ice, skin darkened to leather, limbs drawn in tight. A copper axe gleams nearby. His boots are stuffed with grass, his cloak fur-lined. He was ready for the elements, but not for what found him. Meet the Iceman. Ötzi. Discovered in the Alps in 1991, his 5,300-year-old body preserved a mystery written in flesh. He didn't die by chance. He was murdered. An arrow struck him from behind, piercing his shoulder and severing an artery. His killer left him to bleed out in the cold. Why? No one knows for sure. A robbery gone wrong? A feud? Politics? The wounds tell a struggle. Cuts on his hands, trauma on his skull. But here's the strange part. Nothing was stolen. His axe, his tools, all still there. This wasn't theft. It was personal. Even 5 millennia ago, humanity already knew betrayal, vengeance, and execution. Ötzi wasn't an exception, just unusually well preserved. His frozen corpse lets us witness one of the oldest unsolved murders in history. His last meal, his tattoos, his injuries, all whisper the same truth. Civilization didn't erase violence, it refined it. Zoom out, and the picture grows darker. As societies became complex, so did their reasons to kill. It wasn't just hunger anymore. It was honor, territory, pride, belief. Language itself sharpened the blade. Insults became provocations. Rumors became wars. To contain the chaos, ancient rulers created codes. Babylon's Hammurabi laid them in stone. Compensation for some crimes, death for others. Not all lives weighed equally. A noble's blood demanded execution. A servant's? Maybe a fine. Justice mirrored hierarchy. Kings declared themselves chosen by the gods, not just to rule but to smite. Ceremonial weapons became symbols of divine authority. The lawgiver was also the executioner. And that's what makes Ötzi's death so haunting. He wasn't an army casualty. He wasn't a statistic. He was one man, ambushed and abandoned, a human moment frozen in time. His tools, his wounds, his last meal of grains and ibex meat, all achingly familiar. Strip away the centuries, and he could be you, only with fewer notifications and warmer boots. And still, his fate lingers, a reminder that the instinct to even the score has shadowed humanity from the start. The careful stalking, the ambush set just right, the cold precision of a single arrow loosed at someone's unguarded back. It's old, it's cruel, it's human. Scholars still argue about what really happened to Ötzi. Was it personal vengeance? A clan dispute? The first hints of organized politics? Some even claim he was a ritual offering, sent into the mountains as payment to gods we'll never know. But without words carved in stone, all we can do is guess. Still, his death fits an unmistakable trend. Violence with purpose. Not chaotic, not wild, planned, deliberate, and disturbingly quiet. That's the unsettling part. When people learn to kill in silence, without spectacle or noise, that's when violence stopped being reaction and became instrument. We like to imagine ancient killings as loud, screams, stamping feet, metal on bone, but often it was just a footstep in frost, a flicker of light, a breath cut short, then nothing. You're safe tonight, wrapped in blankets, no arrow waiting in the dark. Yet somewhere in your body lives a mind tuned by eons of conflict, the bloodline of both fighters and mourners. You'll never walk the ice fields or wear boots stuffed with grass, but their instincts still whisper beneath your skin. Ötzi's story is ancient, but it still speaks, a riddle, a warning, a reflection. You're still listening for the answer. Now picture dawn spilling over a misty valley. Thin curls of smoke drift from rough huts made of reed and timber. Rows of something new ripple in the wind, stalks of wheat and barley. For the first time, you're not chasing the meal. You're growing it, staying put. In the long timeline of our species, that's the same as saying, "Come find me." Welcome to the agricultural revolution, the moment humans stopped wandering and started guarding. With farming came a new kind of violence. Once you hunted, shared, and moved on with the seasons. Now you have fences, stockpiles, wealth that can be stolen. And once you have something to lose, you start building walls. This is where war starts to organize itself. Food security changed the rules. A family's future no longer depended on luck or skill alone. It depended on ownership. And once a patch of dirt became survival, the phrase "my land" gained deadly weight. Historians still debate the cause and effect. Did farming create war or just make it bigger? Either way, the evidence is clear. Mass killings and fortified settlements rise right alongside agriculture. More people, more food, more to fight for. You might think agriculture brought peace and stability. In a way it did. But it also brought permanence, permanent neighbors, permanent envy, permanent grudges. You could live a lifetime beside someone you didn't trust. Add drought, disease, or famine, and raiding the next village wasn't greed. It was necessity. Here's a grim little detail. Early farming tools and early weapons were almost identical. A sickle could harvest grain, or tendons. A digging stick could just as easily dig into flesh. The line between farmer and fighter was barely there. So the raids began. Not great wars, not yet. Just night strikes, burning granaries, poisoned wells, stolen cattle, abducted kin. Enough to hurt, not erase. You didn't want them gone, only weak. But if they vanished, others would take their place. And so the cycle spun on. Even belief shifted. Alongside gods of harvest and rain rose gods of war and blood, protectors of soil and vengeance alike. Temples rose beside fortresses. You built walls to keep enemies out and altars to keep your deities close. One stone for defense, one for devotion. Inside these settled communities, violence didn't fade, it evolved. Conflict turned inward. Power layered itself. The strong gathered land. The more people served them. And suddenly, killing wasn't survival anymore. It was status. A chief became a warlord became a king. A king fought not out of hunger, but out of pride. Think of early humans as sparks scattered in darkness. Farming gathered them into steady flames, villages, towns, culture. But fire doesn't stop being fire. One drought, one insult, one hungry ruler, and everything could burn again. You lie there now, breathing softly, imagining one of your ancestors standing on a ridge, watching smoke curl from a neighbor's fields. Maybe they'd won. Maybe they hadn't. Either way, they went home to their clay walls, ate stolen bread, and sharpened a blade in the flicker of firelight. That life carried forward, all the way to you. Chilling, isn't it? But amid the ashes, there was brilliance too. Those same farmers invented irrigation, crop rotation, and animal breeding. They learned to trade as often as they raided. Humanity was never just destruction, it was duality. For every burning field, there was someone planting anew. But tonight, we're tracing the darker thread. Because if food could justify bloodshed, imagine what happens when someone claims the gods demand it. It's night now. The wind hisses through the mountains, and the fire pops quietly. You're wrapped in a rough hide cloak, hands trembling not from cold but from anticipation. Across from you sits a man, eyes blazing, ash streaked on his skin. He clutches a knife, not carving meat, but sketching a symbol in the dirt, chanting words you don't understand. The air feels heavy, dangerous. You know something is coming, and you wish you weren't here to see it. You're about to witness one of humanity's oldest performances, ritual violence. As societies expanded, so did their fears and their ways of easing them. When crops failed, children sickened, or the sky blazed strange, someone had to take the blame. The gods, it seemed, needed proof of devotion, and apologies weren't enough. They wanted blood. Human sacrifice. It sounds like myth, but it wasn't. It was methodical, sacred, and horrifyingly normal for millennia. Archaeologists have uncovered pits in Mesopotamia filled with bodies laid carefully, arms folded, faces serene. Willing? Maybe. Others show ropes, fractures, terror frozen in bone. And it didn't stop there. Across Iron Age Europe, bog bodies lie preserved in peat, throats cut, limbs bound. In Aztec temples, hearts were lifted, still beating toward the sun. This wasn't madness, it was ceremony. The belief that life could buy favor. Why did they do it? Historians still argue. Appeasement, power, fear, control. Probably all at once. Violence became theater. Each sacrifice was spectacle and symbol. Incense rose, drums rolled, a priest raised a blade and the crowd held its breath. Then silence. then cheers, because in their minds it worked. The storm passed. The sickness stopped. Blood was currency, and death the payment. Not all victims were prisoners or outcasts. Sometimes they were the best among them, young, strong, beautiful. The logic was grim. Only the finest gifts pleased the gods. In ancient China, whole entourages were buried alive beside their rulers, still breathing when the soil closed in. And sometimes sacrifice meant suffering, not death. The legends of the Vikings speak of the blood eagle, ribs split open to free the lungs like wings. Whether myth or not, it reveals something deep. To kill for meaning was as human as to kill for food. It's tempting to feel superior now, to think we've moved on. But look closer. Public executions filled squares well into the 1800s, complete with picnics and applause. In some corners of the world, they still do. And even where the blade is gone, the instinct remains. We demand our symbolic sacrifices. The guilty must fall, reputations must bleed. We don't rip hearts out anymore. We destroy them in public view. The crowd still gathers. The chant still rises. The comfort of punishment, the illusion of cleansing, it hasn't left us. Violence, when wrapped in righteousness, still feels like order restored. Scholars debate whether such rituals united people or simply kept them obedient. Maybe both. But don't forget, people wanted to believe. Better someone else than themselves. Sometimes, though, it was themselves. Some walked willingly to the altar, calm, sedated, convinced their death mattered. There's tragedy in that, and awe. You rest now far from that fire, yet the echo lingers. Every monument, every myth of a saviour who dies for others, every story of noble sacrifice, it's all the same heartbeat. The rhythm hasn't stopped. It just plays softer now, in our stories, our politics, our screens. The fires are higher, the city's louder, the altars turn to stages, and beneath your cobblestones, the same old pulse hums on. The markets hum with life, crowds chatter, soldiers stand guard. The scent of spice and sweat fills the air. Civilization, order, beauty, all built upon the same red foundation that's been with us since the beginning. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The more we built, the more we bled. And not from impulse or chaos, but with precision, planning, violence with paperwork. Empires didn't rise on wheat alone. They were raised on conquest, fueled by systematic, large-scale brutality. If you wanted peace, you had to purchase it in blood. If you wanted power, you had to seize it from someone else. Welcome to humanity's grandest business venture. Empires mortared with bone. Take the Assyrians. By the first millennium BCE, they had refined brutality into a statecraft. Their kings bragged in stone inscriptions of severed heads stacked like trophies, of flayed rebels, of skin nailed to city walls. It wasn't considered monstrous. It was public relations. Centuries before the Middle Ages, propaganda was already soaked in blood. Even Rome, the shining symbol of civilization, built its peace on slaughter. The famed Pax Romana, peace for Rome, meant submission for everyone else. One Roman general, after suppressing a rebellion, made every 10th man draw lots for execution, a punishment so routine it earned a word we still use, decimation. That's civilization for you. Historians still argue, were empires violent by nature, or was violence the toll for greatness? But the graves say enough. Skulls split neatly, skeletons pierced with arrows, cities buried beneath ash. Bureaucracy had turned bloodshed into a function. Killing wasn't chaos anymore. It was governance, taxation, discipline, empire maintenance. Consider the Persians. Often praised as lenient rulers, they let their subjects keep their customs, their gods, their tongues. But rebel and retribution was swift. Cities burned, bodies lined the royal roads as messages carved in silence. Mercy came with a deadline. And if Persia was the carrot and stick, Greece was poetry and power. The birthplace of democracy was also home to siege warfare, slavery, and annihilation. Athens, beacon of philosophy, once voted to kill every man of Melos and enslave its women and children. Their crime? Refusing to take sides. Neutrality was treason. We like to think savagery comes from outsiders, barbarians, raiders, the uncivilized, but the worst of it often came from within the marble halls. Senators, priests, and philosophers plotted cruelty with ink and law instead of knives. Violence had become refined, intellectual. In Egypt, pharaohs immortalized conquest on temple walls, not in motion, but in eternal triumph. Enemies knelt beneath their raised maces, forever frozen in defeat. It wasn't a battle scene. It was doctrine, order made visible through ritualized domination. And yet, these same societies birthed beauty. The Code of Hammurabi and the conquest of Elam, the Iliad and the destruction of Troy, the pyramids, and the lash marks carved into those who built them. Civilization and cruelty didn't alternate. They coexisted, inseparable, reflections in the same mirror. We didn't become violent by leaving civilization. We perfected it by inventing organization. Infrastructure wasn't built to avoid war. It was built to sustain it. Armies needed roads, supply lines, economies. Killing became efficient, distant, professional. You could authorize death with a seal instead of a sword. And now you rest in comfort. Walls around you, peace above you. But beneath every stone lies a battlefield. Every law once enforced at spear point. The cities you inherit are mosaics of blood and progress. Listen closely. You can almost hear the echo. Bells in the distance. Not the gentle chime of worship, but the heavy clang of iron on iron. The light fades. Marble turns to soot. You've entered another age, darker, louder, holier. The age of crusades, cathedrals, and creative cruelty. The Middle Ages, a world of parchment and plague, of faith and famine, and of violence sanctified. Here, killing wasn't barbarism, it was devotion. The Crusades began like a sermon and ended like a siege. Starting in 1096, waves of knights rode east under holy banners, promising salvation through slaughter. What was sold as a sacred mission quickly devolved into centuries of conquest, looting, and betrayal. At Jerusalem in 1099, Crusaders didn't just capture the city, they emptied it. Men, women, children, even livestock, all cut down in the name of faith. Chroniclers claim the blood ran ankle-deep through the streets. Maybe they exaggerated. Maybe they didn't. And it wasn't just infidels. Jews were massacred on the road. Christian Byzantines were sacked by their supposed allies in the Fourth Crusade. Holy was flexible when gold was involved. Historians still argue, were the Crusades about faith or greed, salvation or expansion? The truth sits somewhere between sword and scripture. What's certain is that the Church, sworn guardian of mercy, became an eager investor in war. Now let's descend into the dungeons, the theatre of pain. Medieval justice was public, pious, and perversely artistic. Torture wasn't merely punishment, it was instruction. The Iron Maiden, that spiked coffin of legend, might have been a later invention, but real devices were no less horrific. Chairs lined with nails, racks that stretched joints until they snapped, pear-shaped tools twisted where no light should go. Execution was performance art. Crowds came to watch. Vendors sold snacks. Children sat on shoulders to see the condemned scream. The suffering was communal, sanctified. Each shriek was a hymn to order restored, and Europe wasn't unique. In imperial China, Ling Chi, death by 1,000 cuts, turned execution into slow spectacle. The victim kept alive just long enough to feel each slice. It wasn't random, it was ritual, a warning. Violence had structure. It was law. It was moral. It was sacred. A reminder that power didn't just govern, it could wound. And still these same centuries built cathedrals that scraped the sky, composed music that lifted souls, painted altarpieces of tender grace. On Sunday, you knelt before God. On Monday, you watched your neighbor hang. That's the paradox. The Middle Ages weren't dark because monsters ruled. They were dark because humans did. Ordinary, devout, convinced of their own righteousness. Was their violence worse than ours? Historians argue. Modern warfare kills more. Medieval brutality was closer, more personal. You saw the eyes of the man you killed. You smelled the blood. You carried on anyway. Even their weapons had personality. Flails, swords, maces, crossbows, crafted as both tools and symbols. Each one a signature of pain. Each battle a page in humanity's long, loud epic of loyalty and betrayal. Now the field grows quiet again. You rest, but they never did. Your ancestors prayed before every battle, carved blessings into blades, and believed each kill was holy. That urge to make violence meaningful never really faded. We just changed uniforms. The world shifts again. Maps stretch, oceans beckon. You stand now on the deck of a ship, sails cracking, salt biting your lips. Ahead, the horizon. Behind, a flag. Beneath, muskets and chains. Welcome to the age of discovery, or as history remembers it, the age of conquest in silk gloves. This wasn't rage, it was paperwork. Violence with treaties, expansion with signatures. Colonialism was empire gone global, a machine powered by greed and justified by God. Ships no longer carried explorers. They carried extraction, gold, sugar, spices, slave,